Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to talk about now is how to survive and thrive the economic crisis of 2023. Does anyone think there is going to be a crisis in 2023? No one? No. Okay. Oh, I like the positivity. No, there is going to be an economic crisis in 2023. I'm going to set out the scene for that. But I'm going to explain why actually property people are well positioned, if they adopt the right strategies, to actually see this through and come out the other end and prosper. That's really the scene that I'm setting. Because we've been through a few crises in my time in property. I'm going to kind of explain how we kind of dealt with some of those in the past. And what I always find is that the people that put in the groundwork in preparing for they see the crisis coming over the hill, they prepare and plan for it. They not only see it off, but they actually prosper and thrive their way through it. So what is the crisis I'm talking about? The big problem is the money printing that's gone on, and how this is going to impact all of us and how this is going to impact us as property people. They've created out of thin air £500 billion since COVID. Now, in the car on the way here, I was listening to talk radio, and they had the presenter on there, and they did something which I find quite common. They misdescribed what had happened. They actually they talked about government borrowing being too high. What does government borrowing actually mean? When the government borrowed this 500 billion that they've done since COVID, who's the lender? The lender is the Bank of England. The government says, hey, we want 500 million. Rishi Sunak wants to do eat out to help you get cheap burger and chips. But the lender is the Bank of England. The Bank of England don't have any money. What they do is turn on the printing presses. And the horrifying figure is that 99.5% of the government debt that has been created since COVID has been bought by the Bank of England, which has simply printed money into existence out of thin air to supply government money to spend. So that means there are more physical pounds in circulation than any before. And that has to have an effect on the value of that pound in your pocket. And that has quite catastrophic effects for everyone around, unless they do something to hedge against this serious issue. So during lockdown, we didn't really see the impact of what's happened. We didn't see it because when you're locked down, how can you spend? So although the government printed a load of money, the velocity of this movement of cash around the economy just wasn't there. Now everyone's out and about. It is really coming home to roost, and we are seeing higher inflation rates than we have seen since the 1970s. The other thing that's kind of masked this is that all the G7 countries have kind of done this together. So when they all do it together, you're kind of inflating your currencies and the relative values to each other together. When Venezuela did it on its own, it's a weaker currency, they're doing it in isolation. When Zimbabwe did it on its own, it's a weaker currency, they did it in isolation. And that's why it really went belly up for those guys. In the US of A, it's even worse. You know, it's really, really horrific when you find out that 80% of all the US dollars ever printed were printed since January 2020. They have done massive amount. And you see, what has actually held up the dollar is that everyone uses it for international trading. You buy oil in dollars and all of this. You know, but now people are saying around the world, I mean, $100 bills. Do you know 75% of all $100 bills actually reside in foreign banks outside the US? They're held in foreign currency for people to trade, mainly oil and commodities and stuff like that. So people, the dollar is not linked to anything. It's just paper. So around the world, people are losing faith in some of these paper currencies. Already there's resistance now. Saudi Arabia are looking at selling oil for the first time in Chinese yuan. That is something that's actually happening because people are worried about what's going on. We'll get back to the video in just a moment. What is the most exciting opportunity in property right now? And that is repurposing defunct commercial buildings to residential use. Now, most people don't really know where to start, what to look for, and how to exploit these opportunities. And that's why I've prepared 90 minutes of free training for you to get you started on this wonderful journey. You can register for this free training at property-workshop.com. Join me on that free training, and I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of the video. So what does that mean? Well, inflation. Inflation over the last 20 years ain't been that bad. If you look at a basket of goods, and that's what they tend to measure it by, it's a basket of goods, how much have things gone up? So in the last 20 years, we've had about 69%. And the thing is, inflation is really dependent on what your basket of goods is. If you hate avocados, then you don't really care that they've gone up 38%. So it's down to you as an individual, and this basket is kind of on average. The other thing that happens with this basket is it's fiddled. And that is why we feel that the headline rate of inflation that we read about doesn't seem to be true. Headline inflation is 5.1%. They reckon it's going to be 7% by the end of the year. Who feels that prices are going up just by 5%? It's more than that, isn't it? And that's because of the way this is calculated. And this is an idea of how the inflation rate is fiddled. There's also what we call shrinkflation. Toblerone used to look like the diagram below. What they've done is they've kept the price the same, the package size is the same, but they've increased the spacing between the triangles. So they give you less chocolate for the same money. But in effect, the price has gone up. And they've done other things with this basket of goods. 20 years ago, for example, they used to talk about a loaf of bread, and it was brown bread. Now they've swapped it to white bread a few years ago, because that's slightly cheaper. And then how many slices make up a loaf? The number of slices in a loaf for the inflation figures is fewer than it was 20 years ago. So there's all sorts of massaging going on of the figures. So what do you think real inflation actually is? Anyone want to have a guess? I'm hearing a lot of figures, but I'm hearing a lot of double figures. I think it's around, I just feel it's around 12%-ish. And the thing is with inflation, and we haven't seen this since the 1970s. We haven't seen this since the 1970s. So people are very unused to dealing with a high inflation environment. So what we have had is this 68% of inflation in the last 20 years. If we're going to see around 12% inflation for the next few years, it only takes 5 years to rack up as much inflation as we've had in the last 20. That is the thing that we've got to kind of take into account that's actually happening right now. Because there's no solution to inflation. The real solution to, I actually watched, because we had all this in the 1970s. And while I was researching some of this, I saw a YouTube video of an interview with Ronald Reagan when he was going for an election. I think he won in 1980 or something like that. And he was talking about the same problems. You know, the only way out of inflation cycle is to stop borrowing, is to reduce that borrowed money that's been printed and take it out of circulation so that the money is worth something. And there's no indication of that sort of thing happening. So inflation, the real issue right now is that over the next 5 years, we're likely to get the same inflation that we have had in the last 20. And what that means is that currency, if you've got money in the bank, currency is a little bit of an unreliable store of value. If you've got money in the bank, it is basically losing money each year that you have it. If you're reliant on a single source of income through a job, then it is unlikely that will keep pace, earnings will keep pace with the real rate of inflation. It may keep pace with the headline rate of inflation, but will it keep pace with the headline rate of inflation? So what we've got to do is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about financial freedom. You know, people talk about let's achieve financial freedom through property. The first thing you've got to do over the now is to come up with a strategy just to stand still, to preserve your earning capacity, the value of the money that you generate from the inflation that's going to hit us at least for the next 3, 4, probably 5 years. Inflation is like a bear. It chases you. And the people that aren't planning for it and doing something about it will be the ones that the bear will catch up with. So you've got to do a little bit to outrun the bear. You've got to do a little bit more to put some clear distance between you and that inflation bear. So before thinking about financial freedom or anything like that, the first thing that property investors have got to do is come up with a strategy just to stand still, to preserve their income levels how they are right now. The great thing is that property is one of the best ways to hedge, and not just hedge, but outpace the effects of inflation and actually get ahead of the curve, to get ahead of the curve and build long-term wealth. Traditionally, gold has been quite interesting. It's been a hedge against inflation since pretty much the ancient Greeks. It's very fascinating that an ounce of gold in Greek times and in Roman times basically bought a fine tailored gentleman's suit. And pretty much throughout history, you know, Tudor England, even to the present day, the value of an ounce of gold is what it costs to buy a fine tailored suit. So that has been a long-standing way to preserve value against rising inflation. The problem, of course, and you can do things like crypto. We've all seen how that's turned out in the last few months. It's very much up and down and very unpredictable. But the surefire way of doing it, the best way to do it, because obviously gold doesn't produce any income, and you can't buy it in a leveraged way. The way to hedge and get ahead is to focus on income-producing assets, which are bought in a highly leveraged way, with the minimum of cash left in the deal at the end. Now, if all your strategies are focused on that, you will hedge against this inflation curve. I just want to share with you a little bit of my own history, if you like. I graduated from university in 1990. My first job was a graduate at Accenture. My starting salary was $16,500. With that graduate starting salary, I was able to buy this little property here in Islington, the whole property. Today, 2022, I looked this up on the internet, a graduate joining Accenture starting salary is 30 grand. This building in Islington is now converted into 4 flats. The smallest flat is the 1-bedroom flat on the middle floor, which is worth 400 grand. So the person joining the same company as I did all those years ago, on the same graduate scheme, cannot afford to get on the ladder in the way I did. So what that shows is that whatever happens with inflation, buying assets, income-producing assets, which are leveraged and produce positive cash flow enough to service all the debt, is the only strategy, is the only real thing you can do to hedge yourself and get ahead of the inflation that we are about to hit. So the only strategy is the time-honored strategy is income-producing assets. Now, I've done a video on this on YouTube, and tomorrow you'll get an email with some links to some various videos that support some of the content that we've done. But when I talk about buying leveraged assets with little money left in, which are income-producing, I'm talking about the BRRRR strategy. The BRRRR strategy is well known: buy, refurbish, refinance, rent out, repeat. But the way you implement it at different phases of the property market cycle is slightly different. The nuances of of what you do as each component part, depending on the market, is different. So now it's a slightly different ballgame. What I don't think it's the right time for are strategies where you don't own anything. I don't think this is the right time to mess around with rent-to-rent, deal sourcing, deal packaging, and that kind of stuff. Now is the time to acquire assets, income-producing assets, leveraged, which produce positive cash flow. if you do, I mean, when we talk about lease options and the like, that's not a rent-to-rent strategy. That is a strategy when you have the right to own the property at some point in the future. Those are good. The reason for this is because the people that own assets, even if they're leveraged, what happens in times of inflation is the level of the debt actually freezes. The debt stays the same, but the value of that debt in 5 years' time with 12% inflation will be a lot less than it is at the time you take it out. And that's the real power. But the income you generate from those assets tend to rise with inflation. And that's how you basically beat and outrun the trend that we are about to face. Now, what I've found is that there are times when everything kind of aligns in property to give you real opportunities. And the best times that I've had in property are actually at the times when I've figured out what's going on and come up with some strategies to deal with it, head it off at the pass, and actually get ahead. In the 1990s, we had doubling interest rates. We actually had property prices that were falling. And the way to hedge, when property prices were falling back then, I was buying houses every 4 or 5 months, and each time I was buying a house, the market value was slightly less than the one that I bought before. The way to hedge yourself in that sort of market is to always buy below market value from motivated sellers. So whatever the value is today, you're buying 25, 30% from motivated sellers. And you're making sure that the only reason for owning them is the positive cash flow that it produces. And that was a strategy for doing well in the 1990s, and that actually worked very well. In the credit crunch, the real challenge there was getting debt to do projects. Prices fell a little bit, and they fell a little bit because people couldn't get debt. The affordability wasn't there. People couldn't get loans. So if people couldn't get loans, prices fell a little bit because demand was a little bit less. So the opportunity there, or the way we tackled that crisis, if you like, was to use private investors. Private investors JV. We partnered with people, we did deals, we bought unmortgageable properties using private investor capital, made them mortgageable, made them fundable, and then refinanced them in better times. What I've found is that the deals that are done during these crisis times are the best ones. Yeah, properties, when you do things in a boom and you just ride a boom, you don't do that well, quite frankly. You do well at times of trouble. When you figured out what's going on, you head it off at the pass and you set the foundations to do something great. In 2015, we had the advent of Section 24, the tax on your mortgage payments. That was a massive crisis. That was a massive crisis because prior to that point, most people owned properties in their own names. They didn't own them in limited company structures. Now that's changed. When we started Baker Street back in 2016, the theme for many of the meets that we did was to help people navigate their way through this Section 24 crisis and find a way to incorporate their portfolios into limited companies or start their property businesses afresh within limited company frameworks. And during those periods, we ran a whole set of emergency workshops for people, and I think more than 1,500 people attended. And we've helped hundreds of people actually incorporate their property businesses and get out of that mess. What people did on the other side was great, because Section 24 was a real opportunity. It was an opportunity to set up your property business in a proper way, get proper corporate-type funding, and also deal with a lot of other issues that property investors would naturally face, such as capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and stuff like that. So it became a real enabler. So what I think is absolutely key for people is that you've got to do this, because inflation is just going to be a massive killer for people. And the people that always seem to do well in cycles of inflation are people with leveraged property assets. And you've got to emphasize the word leveraged. There's no point buying them cash, because when you borrow, when you leverage property, remember, as inflation goes up, the value of that debt remains frozen. So it gets better and better as the years go on. So to maintain your existing level of income, to achieve financial freedom and to get ahead, you've got to be focusing on these income-producing strategies. You've got to be doing BRRRR in the right way. And otherwise, basically, you're doomed. I mean, I say that in a sort of callous way, but I really feel in every period of inflation, the people who have not done property haven't fared too well. They've seen their standards of living fall and their buying power kind of decrease.
Would you like to explain why you've come here today to the Baker Street Property Meet?
Me and my JV, we watched a lot of YouTube videos for Ranjan, and he sort of inspired us to and opened our eyes up into the commercial world.
Okay.
So we're very much interested in exploring the whole concept of commercial property.
Yeah.
We're experienced in buy-to-let properties, residentials.
Yeah.
And we're just interested in meeting different people and developing some contacts as well. And we heard that it's such a large networking event, and we thought it's a great opportunity for us to come here and meet many different individuals, like-minded individuals.
I'm Lena Chapman. I have come here because it's a well-known event, and you get to meet, you network with 300 high-quality commercial developers, and actually I'm here because I did training with Ranjan, and also I get to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. You're very kind. Yeah.
And then coming to a program like this, meeting people, meeting possible investors, that's why I came here to present our company.
High energy, and good contacts. I think contacts is the main thing I would want to go away with from here. Like some really good, that aren't time wasters. So you get a lot of time wasters in the industry, so I just want some that aren't wasting my time.
Some quality people.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I've started Ranjan's course, the commercial workshop, and I've seen a lot of the videos with you and him in, and it does seem very professional and based on data and knowledge and experience, and it seems like one of the more solid courses and experiences to go on.
High streets across the land are changing forever. Basically, there's an oversupply of retail premises. Shops are closing down, more are going to close down in the future. The government know this, and that's why they're introducing a light touch planning system which allows small developers to easily repurpose these buildings to residential use under a light touch planning regime called permitted development. Now, this is going to be the biggest revolution and the biggest change and the biggest opportunity for property investors that I've ever seen. And this is all coming into effect on 1st of August. So you need to know what's happening and what properties to look for to take advantage of these opportunities so that you can get in there and take that first mover advantage. I've got a 90-minute free masterclass to get you ready for August the 1st. Make sure you join me, click the link below. Whether you're a beginner or expert, we'll get you started.